We are currently studying the Encyclopedia Talmudit, the Talmudical Encyclopedia. We are in volume Hey 5, and the entry is Goy, Gimel Vav Yud. And we're up to page Reish Tzadik Hey, 295, in the middle of the right-hand column, and the heading, or the subheading, is Be'ishus, with regards to marital relations. Just by way of a brief introduction to today's lesson, as we've learned in the past, certain things, everything has to be taken in context, but certain things, we will make certain generalizations or perhaps a certain rule, and that rule will only apply in a very specific or in several specific cases. And they don't apply across the board. Or, alternatively, a rule would be a rule, but then there are exceptions, and then those exceptions are by no means part of that rule. Similarly, when we make certain statements, in this case about non-Jews, about Goyim, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily to be taken outright, literally across the board. However, it has to be taken in context of when it was used and what purpose it was used for, what it's referring to, as we'll see probably in today's class an example of that. Another thing, there are many opinions in the Talmud, as we've discussed in many of our classes up to this point, and the Encyclopedia Talmudit brings down all opinions, whether it's the sages of the Mishnah, or the rabbis of the Talmud, or the later commentators and codifiers, known as the Rishonim, and then even later yet, the Achronim. They bring it all down, all the various opinions. Therefore, it's very important to realize that not necessarily is everything that we're learning, or every opinion that is stated, the actual verdict and what we follow. And oftentimes, they will tell us in this encyclopedia what the halacha, what the Jewish law is. So we bring down the various opinions, even the ones that are rejected as far as halacha is concerned, because it is still part of the Torah, and therefore we need to know it to get a full picture. And since this is an encyclopedia, it's going through everything and giving you all of the information. So, at this point, we will continue. Again, page Reish Tzadik Hey, 295. Be'ishus. Goy or Goyim with regards to marriage and marital relations. Al dinim she'al Yisrael, with regards to laws pertaining to Jewish people, biyachas legoy be'ishus, with regards to a non-Jew, how the Jew interacts with a non-Jew with regards to marriage or marital relations, danim, so the following things are judged, are discussed. Be'isr chitun, the prohibition of marriage, the prohibition of a Jew marrying a non-Jew. Bevias znus, in having intimate relations in a way of prostitution. Uvisfisas kiddushin, and by means of the kiddushin, which is a term for Jewish marriage. It's the first stage of marriage. However, they translate it in English, betrothal, but it doesn't really make a difference what word they use in English, because it's a halachic concept for the Jew. And kiddushin basically is the first step where the man acquires, in a certain sense, if you will, the woman, and she becomes his wife. Then there's a second stage. However, once there was kiddushin, she is his wife, and to the exclusion of anyone else, and she's considered 100% a married woman as far as everyone else is concerned. So getting back to the relationship between the Yisrael, the Jew, and the Goy, the non-Jew. When it comes to marriage and marital relations, we're discussing basically three things here. Marriage, intimate relations, and Kiddushin, or how Kiddushin goes into effect or does not go into effect. The Isur Chitun, with regards to the prohibition of marriage, which in English would be referred to as intermarriage. Asur min haTeira lihischaten im ha'umais. It is biblically forbidden for a Jew to intermarry with the nations, meaning with any member of any nation in the world other than the Jewish people. Shene'emar, and this is clearly derived and stated in a verse in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 3, V'loi sischatein bam, and you shall not marry into them, bitcha, your daughter, leisitein livno, you shall not give to his son, to one of the members of the nations of the world, uvitoy leisikach livnecha, and his daughter you shall not take for your son. So it goes both ways. It makes no difference whether the Jew is male or female. The Jew is not allowed to marry a non-Jew. So if it's a Jewish man or boy we're talking about, he's forbidden to marry a non-Jewish girl or woman. And same thing vice versa. If it's a Jewish woman or girl, she is forbidden to marry a non-Jewish man or boy. And there really is no difference at this point, as far as that's concerned. And some of you may be wondering and saying, "What I thought there was a major difference," and I thought we're speaking about the prohibition of intermarriage. So for a Jew, it makes no difference whether it's his son or his daughter. They're not allowed to marry out and to marry anyone other than a Jew. Now there's actually a dispute of the early sages, the Mishnaic sages, as to which nations are referred to in this verse when it says that a Jew may not marry them and don't take their daughter for your son, or give your daughter to their son. Which nations are we talking about? Chachamim soivrim, the ones referred to as the Chachamim, which would be the majority of the sages. Chachamim just simply means the wise men. They hold Shaloi nemar halav, that this negative commandment, this prohibition, was only stated el al sheva ha'umais. It is exclusively for a member of the 7 nations which were occupying the land of Eretz Yisrael, the Knani, and all of those families, the Knani, Chiti, Amori, those 7. Shenizkru lifnei b'parsha, which were mentioned earlier in that parsha. So in that section of the Torah, when you get to the verse, V'lo sischatein bam, well, previously was speaking about the 7 nations that are in the land. So therefore the Chachamim maintain that this prohibition, this biblical prohibition, applies for a Jew not being allowed to marry anyone from the 7 nations. And the logic goes as follows. Shemeyachar shenemar, for since it is stated in the above quoted verse, or in the next verse actually, in verse 4, Ki yosir es bincha me'acharai, for he will take away your son from me, v'avdu elokim acherim, and they will worship other gods. So the Torah is giving us a reason for why intermarriage is forbidden. Because it will cause the Jew to be idolatrous. So the Chachamim maintain, Nisma'atu, this is coming to exclude She'ar ha'umais, the rest of the nations, She'einon adukim ba'avodah zara k'moisam, that are not devoted and so strongly connected to idolatry as those 7 nations. Not all the nations in the world are idolatrous. At that time, those 7 nations were known to be very, very idolatrous. And therefore, those were the ones that God prohibits the Jew to marry. Rabbi Shimon, according to another one of the Tanoim, Rabbi Shimon, and he has a way of understanding the verses, and he understands the reasoning. He follows along that we're supposed to give reasoning for what the verses state. So therefore he says, Echad Sheva Umois, whether it is a member of one of the 7 nations, Ve'echad Kol Shar HaUmois, or whether it is anyone from any of the other nations of the world, the Isur Zeh are all in this prohibition. Shene'emar, because the verse says, Ki Yasir, that he will take away, he will remove. The rabbis call HaMesirim, and that is coming to include all those that will take away the Jew from their faith. Sheharei, for behold, Afim lo nemar b'Torah, for even if the Torah wouldn't have stated, Ki Yasir, for he will take astray, take away. Hayinu dershim tam ze me'atzmeinu, we would have explained this reason on our own, because Reb Shimon says you're supposed to always try to find the reason for the biblical statement. So we would have given this reason on our own, even had the verse not stated so explicitly. V'loma nemar, so in that case, why is it stated? According to him, why does the verse give the reason? Why is it written there? El rabbis shar ha'umais. The reason is to include all the other nations. Or, alternatively, Oy, Shekivan Shamra Torah. Since the Torah stated, Shatam, that the reason, Shalois is Chatein, that you're not allowed to marry out, that intermarriage is forbidden for a Jew, Hu Mishum is because Ki Yasir, that the reason is that they will take away your son from me. Nilmad Mizeh, from this we learn out, L'chol HaMesirim Me'achre HaMakim, for all those that take away anyone from Hashem, which means any form of intermarriage. And we have over here machlekes now. So according to the Chachamim, biblically it is not forbidden for a Jew to marry a goy that's not one of the 7 nations. According to Reb Shimon, it is forbidden, and that is why the verse clearly states the reason, because even if it wouldn't have said the reason, we would have understood that's the reason. So therefore, it seems almost superfluous. So why does the verse state it? In order to be inclusive and to tell you clearly that anyone who marries out, so in a sense that now the next generation, the children, if there are any, are going to be taken away, taken astray. And therefore, that applies to all nations, not only to the 7 adulterous nations. Now there's a dispute amongst the Rishonim, the early commentators. Yesh Oimrim, there are those that say, that this prohibition of intermarriage with anyone other than the 7 nations is not the prohibition of loisis chaten, that thou shalt not marry them. Because the prohibition is only when they're not Jewish. It's only if they're still in their state of being not Jewish, they didn't convert. For after a member of one of the other nations is niskayer, converts and becomes Jewish, then everyone agrees that there's no prohibition. So putting aside the 7 nations, any of the other nations of the world, everyone agrees that if a member of one of those nations was to go through a proper halachic, by Jewish law, conversion, and they become Jewish, even though they're originally coming from a certain nation, which was not a Jewish nation, a Jew has no problem to marry them. Shegeirim mutarim lovei b'kohol. As a rule, converts to Judaism, geirim, are permitted to enter the Jewish community, meaning to marry in. Uvegoyusam lo shayach chitun. And when they're not Jewish, you can't marry them. Not that it's prohibited. It can't go into effect. Shein kiddushin toifsin begoy. Because kiddushin, that halachic form of stage 1 of marriage, doesn't happen, doesn't apply, will not go into effect to a non-Jew. So they are learning very interestingly that the reason why a Jew can't marry a non-Jew other than the 7 nations is because they can't, not that it's forbidden. And that's why, once they can, it's permitted. And how can they? If the person became Jewish. They're still from that nation, but because the kiddushin can go into effect, can grab hold. Ela ha'isurhu, so what's the prohibition? Mishum alav, it's a different prohibition, a different negative commandment. And that is, shall bitcha leisitin livnoi, your daughter you shall not give to his son, uvito lesikach livnecha, and his daughter you shall not take for your son. See, the verse makes 2 statements. It says, lois is chatein bam, don't marry them. And then it goes on, and it says, don't give your daughter to them, don't take their daughter for your son. So if it's anyone other than the 7 nations, so we say, lois is chatein, don't marry them, doesn't apply. What does apply is, don't give your daughter, and don't take their daughter. And therefore the verse has to be read for both directions. In other words, you have to make a very clear demarcation in the verse and say that's talking about that. And now the rest of the verse is talking about that. Namely as follows. We're reading in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3. Lois yischatein, the first 2 words. Don't marry. That we're interpreting to mean b'sheva umois. Afilu begerusam. You cannot marry anyone from the 7 nations, even if they convert. Even if they go through a proper conversion, become Jewish, there's a prohibition, a Jew can't marry them. The koilalavzeh, the goyusam uvegerusam. And this prohibition, this negative commandment, equally covers and includes them in their non-Jewish state and in their converted to Judaism state. It's the same prohibition. A Jew cannot marry anyone from the 7 nations. Aval shar umois, but all the other nations, begerusam mutarim, in their converted to Judaism state, they're permitted to be married. Uvegoyusam, and when they're in their non-Jewish state, Loi sitein v'goymer ki yasir. Then the rest of the verse is to be applied. Don't give your daughter and don't take their daughter, for they will take you astray. V'chein kol hamesirim, and likewise anyone who takes you astray, which basically means anyone who's not Jewish, because then the grandchild could be taken astray. Umikan, so from this type of a deduction, from here we learn sheshar ha'umois, that all the rest of the nations, shenisrabu miki yasir, that they're included from the second half of the verse where it says ki yasir, for he, the non-Jew, will take away your son. Ein l'rabois, so we should not include ella begoyusam, only when they're in their non-Jewish state does that apply. Shebegerusam, for in their converted to Judaism state, kvar eina mesirim, they no longer are taking away your child, because your child will be Jewish because they're Jewish. All right, that is one approach. That is the Ramban and the Ritva. That's one way to learn it. V'yesh oimrim, and then there are others that say, there are those that say, No, that the prohibition is the first two words in the verse, that you're not allowed to intermarry. A Jew can't marry anyone from any other nation. And this prohibition, these two words, which is a negative commandment, is stated only when they're in their non-Jewish state, when they are not Jewish, prior to conversion. All right, so we have two approaches. And that approach is attributed to the Rambam, Maimonides. Now, they tell us here in this encyclopedia, even la halacha, when it comes to the actual ruling. So what is the halacha? What's the Jewish ruling? Which way do we follow? Nechleku rishonim. We actually find an argument between the early commentators. Yesh oimrim, some say, sheYisrael shebo al goya mishar ha'umois derech ishus. That if a Jewish man had marital relations, had intimate relations with a non-Jewish woman from any of the other nations, not the seven, a non-Jewish woman from any of the other nations, o Yisraelis, or alternatively, a Jewish woman, sheniv ala legoy derech ishus, that she had intimate relations by a non-Jewish man, marital relations. So in this case, the Jew, either man or woman, whichever case, the Jew would receive the 39 floggings, would receive lashes, biblically. Shenamar, because the verse says, you shall not marry them. And this includes all the nations of the world in this prohibition. And so is explicit in the prophet Ezra, in the book of Ezra, that Ezra makes the following statement. Okay, it's the quote we're about to do now is the other book, which is his friend. They go together. Nehemiah, chapter 10, verse 31. What does it say in the book of Nehemiah? These are the words of Ezra. V'asher loy nosan, v'asher loy nitein b'noiseinu l'amei haaretz, v'esp'noseim loy nikach levanenu. We will not give our daughters to the nations of the world, and their daughters we will not take for our sons. And then, the other opinion, the yesh choilkim, and there are those that disagree, the soivrim, and they hold, shaloi nemar lo isischaten el b'sheva umeis bilvad. When it says you shall not marry the nations of the world, that is clearly referring only to the seven nations. And there is no biblical prohibition for anyone other than the seven nations. So even in halacha, we end up with both opinions. Now, certainly you can't marry them, and the marriage does not go into effect. But the question is having marital relations, having intimate relations, what prohibition is that? How does that fit in? So there we have two opinions. Bottom of the page, we're on Reish Tzadik Vav, 296, last two lines in the page. Ho'av, the father, the Jewish father. Hamiyached isha mehem, which designates a woman from the non-Jewish nations, livnoi, for his Jewish son. A father takes a non-Jewish woman for his Jewish son. Oy, shenasan bitoy lechad mehem, or he gave his daughter to one of the non-Jewish people. Oyver al halav, that Jewish father is transgressing this prohibition. Ella she'eino loike. The only thing is he does not get the 39 lashes. He does not get the floggings. Lefi she'ein boi maaseh, because there is no action in it. By him just designating, he didn't actually do something, as opposed to a person who is engaged in the act is physically doing the act of sinning. Whereas the father who designates his son or his daughter didn't actually do anything. And one of the rules is that any one of the 365 negative commandments that doesn't have an action to it. A whole bunch of the prohibitions are prohibitions that a person may be passive, or they may just be verbal. So then there's no malchus, there's no lashes for that. Same thing in this case. The father who designates his son or his daughter for the non-Jew does not get the lashes. V'chol shekain, how much more so? Shehamizdaveg be'atzmo imohem, that someone who himself personally marries them, a non-Jew, bichlal halav, is certainly included in this prohibition. If a father is already transgressing because he designates his child, so certainly a person who themselves marries out. Kishu meyachta lo isha, if this person takes the non-Jewish woman and designates her as a wife, meaning he marries her, he thinks that that's what he's doing. V'ein halav ella, k'sheba ela der chasmus vishus. This prohibition is only if he actually has relations with her in a way of marriage. If he has intimate relations with her. V'lo yasa adam shushvin legoy mishum lo yischatin bam. Liten alein b'lo yisaseh. And likewise, a person should not be an escort, or the person who leads the person to the wedding, the person who is bringing the person to the wedding, which often generally is the parents. So a Jew should not serve that function with a goy, and that is included litein aleim b'lo yisaseh. This includes the prohibition, the negative commandment. However, this is not really the biblical prohibition. It is something which is rabbinic, but they're using the verse as support, so to say. The prohibition of this shushvinus, of being the escort, is a rabbinic decree, and they're just relying it, using it as support from the verse. But they don't mean that it's biblically forbidden. Now, we have an interesting halacha, an interesting law coming up right now, and it's actually a story that actually happened in the desert when the Jewish people were wandering for 40 years. This happened towards the end of the 40 years, and it is a law that Moshe Rabbeinu taught, and then it came to play itself out. The case actually was happening, and at that moment, Moshe had forgotten the halacha, and his great-nephew, Pinchas, remembered it, went running to Moshe, and asked him what to do, and then he reminded Moshe, but didn't you teach us the law that we're about to see? And Moshe said, indeed. So therefore, you should be the one to carry it out, because you're the one who remembered it, and then he went ahead and did it. And what is that case? Haboal hagoya b'farhesia. If a Jewish man has intimate relations, he has intercourse with a non-Jewish woman in public, bein derech chasnus, whether it's by way of marriage, even though there can't be a marriage because she's not Jewish, but whether he's doing it with the intent of marriage, or they civilly got married, uvein derech znus, or whether they're doing it in a way of promiscuity, as a harlot, doesn't make a difference. a Jewish man is having relations with a non-Jewish woman in public, so the halacha is kanoim poigim boy umemisim oisoi. Those that are zealous attack him and kill him on the spot. Very unique, very unusual, because generally speaking, whatever the crime is, you warn the person, there are two witnesses, and then you go to the Beis Din, to the Jewish court, you testify, they have a whole hearing, and they go through everything, and they interrogate, and they go through all the details, the testimony, etc., etc., and then they give a verdict. And in a capital offense, the Beis Din will then kill the person in one of four ways. And if it's a case of lashes, they will administer the lashes. Here, no Beis Din, no testimony, no witnesses, no warning. Zealous people, you have to be zealous to do it. It's very interesting. You have to be one of those people, and then you go out there and you kill the person. And it has to be, there are a lot of conditions. It has to be that they're actually still in the middle of the act. But if they separated, it's too late, and then you can't kill them. Bivas Yisrael, with regards to a Jewish woman or girl, Hanivelas Lagoy, if she's having relations with a non-Jewish man, what's the halacha then? Nechlik Rishonim. That's already a dispute. The first case, no arguments, that's a clear-cut case. A Jewish man does that with a non-Jewish woman in public, kanoim, kill him on the spot. But if it's the reverse, if it's the Jewish woman who is having relations publicly with a non-Jewish man, yesh soivrim, there are those that hold, she'ein kanoim poigim ba, that kanoim do not attack her, and she is not to be killed by these zealous people. Because ultimately, her child, even from this relation, is like her, and he's a kosher Jewish child. So if she were to conceive, the child would be considered a kosher Jew. And therefore, we don't kill her. The yesh soivrim, but then you have those that hold Sha'af ba, that also in her case, yesh din shel kanoim poigim, there is this rule of kanoim poigim, just like in the case of a man, that during the act, zealous people would go and kill her on the spot, just like that. So we have a dispute as to whether it applies in the case of the Jewish woman. Next, bevias znus. What about now? We're going to discuss the Jew having relations with a non-Jew, not for the sake or the intent of marriage, but simply for the sake of prostitution. Beis Din shel chashmonoim gazru. So this is actually a rabbinic decree. And we're even told which Jewish court in which period did it. It was the Beis Din in the times of the Chashmonoim, the Hasmoneans, going back to the Hanukkah story, which was in the middle of the times of the Second Temple. Gazru, they made a decree, al habo al agoya derech znus, that if a Jewish man has relations with a non-Jewish woman, but in a promiscuous way, for the intention of prostitution, not for marriage. He doesn't mean to marry her. So they, the Beis Din, said it's forbidden. It's rabbinically forbidden. However, the penalty is kares, medivri Kabbalah, which means according to the oral Torah. So if it's kares, that's a very severe sin, and that means it by definition has to be biblical. So what do we mean that they decreed? Very simple. prior to their decree, the Beis Din wouldn't be able to administer any punishment. But because there's a decree made by the Beis Din, by the Jewish court, now it's also punishable by the court, namely to give the lashes. So the man that has relations with a non-Jewish prostitute or a non-Jewish woman or girl in a promiscuous way, not in a marriage, gets lashes. Now, we're going to address something which people that are very learned, if they know exactly the little nuances, may have a question. So now he's going to address that and explain it. So here comes the question in an answer form. Afal pi, even though shekol aboyel isha, that in any case, anytime a man has relations with a woman, l'shem znus, for the sake of prostitution, beloy kiddushin, without kiddushin. He's not doing the kiddushin, he does not marry her. Loike min atera. So he gets 39 lashes, biblically, because it's an absolute biblical prohibition. And what's the prohibition? Lefishabo al kedesha, because he had relations with a woman that in the word of the verse is called a kedesha, which would basically be a woman who is set aside or designated or hired out to be a prostitute or harlot. That's what kedesha is. So anytime a man has relations with someone and it isn't for the purpose of marriage, well then that's the only alternative. So he would always get malchus. That only applies if she's a Jewish woman, because the verse clearly states that there shall not be a kedesha amongst the Jewish women or girls. So for a Jew to transgress this prohibition of having relations with a prostitute, with a kedesha, and therefore getting the malchus, she's got to be Jewish. Avol goya, but a non-Jewish woman, girl, prostitute, eina bichlal halav, shenemar al kedesha. She's not included in this negative commandment, in this prohibition of kedesha. Shebefeirush nemar, for the verse states clearly, where it speaks about this prohibition, it says, Lo yisiyeh kedesha mibnois Yisrael. There shall not be a kedesha, a prostitute, amongst the Jewish girls. Clearly says it can't be a Jew. And the only thing that the Torah prohibits for a Jew as far as having intimate relations with a non-Jewish woman or girl is for the sake of marriage, in the form of marriage. But a Jewish man who has intimate relations with a non-Jewish woman or girl in a way of prostitution, this is a rabbinic prohibition, and the reason why they made this decree, it's a decree lest he come to marry her, because if you're going to allow the Jew to go to non-Jewish prostitutes, that can definitely lead to him marrying one of them, or whatever. Therefore, the rabbis came along and they said a Jewish man is not allowed to have relations with any non-Jewish woman, even if it's not for the form, or in the form of, or for the sake of marriage.
What is it that they're concerned that it will lead to marriage?
Because that's a biblical prohibition.
But there is no marriage.
Right. But
So
the
what
pasuk
is
says
the
leisis
concern?
chatin bam. In other words, biblically, a Jewish man can't, even though it can't happen, he's not allowed to, quote unquote, marry a non-Jewish woman. In other words, he can't bring her into his home and say, I want to be your husband. You be my wife. Let's live together, husband and wife. Or, in today's society, have some kind of a civil marriage. Make this big party and call it a wedding. Or go to a judge and say we'd like to legally get married. So by Jewish law, it doesn't go into effect. That's true. But that is the prohibition. So a Jewish man that does that receives the biblical punishment of the lashes. Whereas, if he would just go to someone and he would just want to have relations with her once or twice or many times, but by no means does he want her to be his wife, or not yet, that is a rabbinic prohibition, because it may lead to transgressing and doing the first thing that we said, that which is a biblical prohibition of quote-unquote marrying her.
So he's having a maritable, he's having relations towards marriage in the manner the nations would consider towards marriage.
Right. Right. Now, we're going to address something which is a very strong logical question. Because if you just think about what we just said, so it comes out as follows. Ve'al tisma, and do not be bewildered, don't wonder, heyach, how, tiye ha-Yisraelis ha-Kedesha, the Jewish woman that's a prostitute, biyasa biznus, bilav. So having relations with her is a biblical prohibition. It's one of the 365 negative commandments. And to have relations with a non-Jewish prostitute, that's only a rabbinic decree? Something sounds off over there. So it comes out that it's, so to say, less of a sin for the Jewish man to be with a non-Jewish prostitute. So when he's looking for the prostitute, he opens up the book and he checks under prostitute, and then he wants to order a prostitute, so he's going to ask, I need a non-Jewish one because that's less of a sin. Why is it less of a sin? Something seems a bit off logically. First of all, he's doing a sin of prostitution. He's involved in that. And a non-Jewish woman would only be a rabbinic prohibition? So he's saying, don't be shocked. Don't be wondering about that. We'll explain it now. It's very simple. She'isur ha'arayos hu b'gzeiras ha'kosuv. The whole subject matter of the whole prohibition of anything to do with adultery of any form, any type of forbidden sexual relationship that the Torah forbids, it's all a decree of Hashem. V'davar she'ein lo yitam b'chol pratav, and it's something which doesn't have reason in all of its detail. So you can't start using logic whenever you want, because the whole thing is a decree. And therefore, yes, it will come out, this kind of logically peculiar total, when you put everything in, that for a Jewish man to have relations with a Jewish woman, she's not married, she's a prostitute, or she's not even, that's not what she does for a living, but she's going to engage herself in the relations with this man, not for the sake of marriage, it's not for Kiddushin. That's a biblical prohibition, and he gets lashes for that. Whereas doing the exact same thing with some non-Jewish prostitute or some non-Jewish woman who they're not getting married, that is rabbinic. That's fine. That's how it works. And then you have amongst the Rishonim that they hold she'ikar ha'isur hu min ha'Torah, that no, the main prohibition is biblical, even with a non-Jewish prostitute. The only thing that the Hasmonean Jewish court decreed, we said they'd made a decree. What they decreed was that there should be the penalty of lashes. The prohibition was always there, according to this opinion. But there was no penalty. The lashes were only for a Jewish prostitute, whereas if she's not Jewish, then the Beis Din didn't give any lashes until the Beis Din of the Chashmonaim came along, and then they decreed. That's how.
Is it under the same prohibition?
Yes, absolutely. Even though the verse says "Mi b'nois Yisrael," b'v'nois Yisrael, to teach you that the penalty is only. So we have two ways of learning. Either biblically, it's not forbidden for a Jewish man to go to have relations with a non-Jewish woman, not for the sake of marriage, and the rabbis made the decree, or it's biblically forbidden, and what the rabbis did was they instituted the punishment of lashes. Okay. Next, that brings us to the top of the page on the left-hand side, Reish Tzadik Ches, 298. Bein Shmoina Asar Davar, Shegazru Talmidei Shammai V'Hillel. All right, there is a Mishnah in the tractate of Shabbos, which tells us that there were 18 things that were decreed by the students of the school of Shammai and Hillel. 18 things. And one of the 18 things was al gezeira al bnei sehen, that they then, the students of Hillel and Shammai, decreed, rabbinical decree, on the daughters of the non-Jews. Non-Jewish girls. What they decree. There's a dispute between the later rabbis, leaders of the Talmud. What exactly was this decree about B'nai Sehen? Two opinions. Im Perushoy, whether it means Shegazru Tumas Nidus al B'nai Sehen, did they decree that non-Jewish girls can become impure through the tomb of Nida, which is basically when a girl or woman gets her menstrual cycle period, when she sees blood. So, biblically, only a Jewish woman or girl becomes a Nida, which is that state of impurity. By non-Jews, it doesn't apply. It means nothing. And when she gets her period, a non-Jewish woman, she is as impure and as pure. It makes no change in her spiritual status. Nothing at all. But according to one opinion, that was the decree that the students of Hillel and Shammai made, that it should apply to them as well. Or the other opinion maintains, Shegazru al yichud im hagoya. The decree they made then was that it is forbidden for a Jewish man to be in seclusion with a non-Jewish woman or girl. Meaning, it went in stages. Originally, a Jewish man would not be allowed to be in seclusion, alone, in a locked room or something, with a married woman, but she has to be Jewish, of course, because we're afraid of what it might lead to. But a non-Jewish woman was not originally in the decree. The original decree, I think, goes back to the Beis Din of King David. He made the decree. Mm-hmm. But it came in stages. So in a much later time, the times of the students of Hillel and Shammai, according to the second opinion, the decree was that a Jewish man is not allowed to be alone even with a non-Jewish woman. Even with a non-Jewish girl. And halacha shegazru al hayichud. In this case, we have a clear halacha, a ruling in the Shulchan Aruch, and that is that the decree was indeed with regards to yichud, to being in seclusion, that a Jewish man can't be in seclusion even if the girl is not Jewish, and it does not apply to the impurity state of nida. Now, the next case, interestingly, is going to deal with a rabbinic decree that actually preceded the giving of the Torah. How do you like that? A rabbinic decree that took place by a beis din, by a court, before the revelation at Sinai, before Hashem gave us the Torah. And let's see what it is. Yisraelis, a Jewish woman or girl, sheniv ala legoy derech znus, that had intimate relations with a non-Jewish man by way of prostitution, not as marriage, but as promiscuity. So now, that Jewish girl, yesh soivrim, there are those that hold sheminatera biasheterhi, that biblically speaking, those relations were permissible. There was nothing wrong for a Jewish girl to be a prostitute for non-Jewish men. Some say biblically it's not a prohibition. Ve'eina asura ella, it is only prohibited midrabanan, rabbinically. That the rabbis, so to say, made a decree, and they said that a Jewish girl may not be involved in the act of prostitution, even with non-Jewish men. Migzeras beis din shel shem. And where does this go? Where does this come? This is going back to the gzeira of the beis din of Shem, the son of Noach. Remember, Shem and Aver had a yeshiva. There was a school of Shem and Aver, where they taught Torah, if you will. So they, the yeshiva of Shem, the son of Noach, they made a decree. And the decree was that a Jewish girl may not have relations even with a non-Jewish man, even if it's not in a form of marriage or for the sake of marriage. But we don't hear that there should be the penalty of kares, of being cut off from Hashem. That we don't find. It's not kares, it's a rabbinic decree. So the woman who has relations with a non-Jewish man, we don't find that that's kares. As is in the other case. The opposite, if a Jewish man has relations with a non-Jewish girl, so before we were just going back and forth as to the basin of the Chashmonaim, they decreed that. But one thing was for sure, we said midivri kabbalah, it's kares. The penalty there for a Jewish man is kares. But we don't find the same thing the other way around. If it's a Jewish woman who's having prostitutional relations with a non-Jewish man. Shekain b'na shel Yisraelis. Why not? Because there's a major difference. The daughter of a Jewish girl or woman, Yimashech achareha, is going to follow her, v'yeh Yisrael, he'll be a Jew. If she conceives and has a child from this relationship, the child will be Jewish. But whereas the opposite case, when it's a Jewish man who's having relations with a non-Jewish girl prostitute, if she conceives and has a child from the seed of the Jew, that child is not Jewish. That's kiyasir. That's taking away your child from me. The child is not Jewish. Whereas in this case, if the Jewish woman, the prostitute, has a child, it's a Jewish child.
So the child that is born as a non-Jew is being taken away?
Well, yeah, because it's the father's a Jew, and here this is his seed, and we're saying nope, not Jewish.
So we're saying the seed is being taken away.
Yeah, right. Ve'ein svara loymar, and now we're negating another thing. there's no logic to say sheyesh ba'isur aseh, that, well, guess what? Not that there's a prohibition in the sense of a negative commandment, but there is a prohibition as a positive commandment. One of the 248 positive ones. Namely, mishum itziuha v'sisaref. Because the words that Yehuda used when he was told that his daughter-in-law Tamar had obviously had relations with someone because she was expecting. She was pregnant. So Yehuda said, take her out and have her burned. That's what he said to do. So that sounds like it's a positive thing to do. That's the penalty. So in other words, you might say, oh, so the prohibition is really, it is a prohibition, it is biblical, but it's not a negative commandment, it's a positive commandment. The prohibition is coming from the other direction. Ha'amur b'gzeiras beistin shel shem. And that is referred to in the gzeira, the decree that the Beis Din of Shem made. So he's saying you can't say that. There's no logic to say that. And therefore it remains that it is in fact a decree by the Beis Din of Shem. And then there is amongst the later commentators who actually wrote the opposite. Namely, Shaniv Eles Legoy, that a Jewish woman who has relations with a non-Jewish man, Yesh Ba'isr Min HaTorah, that is a biblical prohibition that she has transgressed. She'al Goy Shebal Yisraelis Amra Torah Ki Yosris Bincha Me'acharai, because that's the case where the Torah says that if a non-Jewish man has relations with a Jewish girl, that's where the Torah says, don't allow that because he will take away your son. Because it's called your son, because if she conceives and has a son, that kid's Jewish. But because his father's not Jewish, they're going to take him away from Judaism. And he really is your son. He really is Jewish. So they learn it the exact opposite way. And they say that there is a biblical prohibition. Next, Goy Sheba Albas Kohen. If a non-Jewish man had relations with a Jewish girl who's the daughter of a Kohen, her father's a Kohen, she's a Bas Kohen, Pois Lamina Truma. By that one time that he had relations with her, and it doesn't matter whether she was willing or whether she was coerced, makes no difference. He has now disqualified her from eating truma, from eating any of the holy food that the kohanim receive as gifts. She cannot eat any kohen food called truma. V'chein, and likewise, poisel es hakohenes v'aleviya v'yisraelis b'viyasoi min hakihuna. Furthermore, a non-Jew who has relations with a Jewish girl, whether she's the daughter of a Kohen, whether she's the daughter of a Levi, or whether she's a regular Yisraelis, by him having relations with her, he now disqualified her from kehuna, from being allowed to marry a Kohen. She's no longer fit for a Kohen. And it makes no difference what her original status was. Whether she is the daughter of a Kohen and now she can't be part of the Kehuna family, she can't eat the Truma, and she can't be with her husband who is a Kohen, or whether she's a Levi or Yisraelis. Doesn't make a difference. Shene'emar, for the verse states, Uvas Kohen kisi almana, and if the daughter of a Kohen is going to be a widow, Ugrusha, or a divorcee, Vizera ein la, and she has no seed, meaning she has no children, Vishavel Beisa via V'gemer, and then she returns to her father's household. Meaning to say, a woman who's married to a non-Kohen, she's the daughter of a Kohen, and she's married to a non-kohen. As long as she's married to her non-kohen husband, she cannot eat truma in her father's house. However, as soon as that marriage is dissolved, in one of two ways, either she becomes a widow, her non-kohen husband died, or they're divorced. She now immediately becomes permitted to eat kohen food, truma, in her father's home. Okay? Now that's what the verse says. So from that we learn out, this applies to whoever there exists the concept of widowhood or divorcee. Yatzagoy, to exclude the non-Jew, there's no such thing as being a widow or a divorcee, because she can't be married to him. So if she was married to him, and then he died, she's not halachically a widow. Or if she was married to him by civil law, and then he divorced her civilly, she's not a divorcee either. So therefore, if she was ever with a guy, it makes no difference. That disqualifies her from being able to eat truma, even after her non-Jewish husband is gone. And this is even according to the opinions that hold that if she does in fact have a son from this guy, that child is kosher. He's a kosher Jew. Because that itself is argued. She's the daughter of a kohen. And then if she transgresses, or even if it was against her will, but if she has a child from a non-Jew, so the question is, what is the status of that child? So even if you're going to say that child is a kosher Jew, I mean, he's not a kohen, obviously.
Well, it's not a death penalty.
Right.
So it wouldn't just be a regular Jew?
So some say that he's a regular kosher Jew. Others argue and say, no, because she's the daughter of a kohen, so therefore he's not a regular kosher Jew. But
he'd be a mamzer?
Not necessarily a mamzer, but he would not be allowed into intermarry into the Jewish community.
There's a status besides a mamzer that cannot marry into the Jewish community? Or is this something unique just in this case?
He may be considered a chalal, which is a non-proper kohen. Someone who's from the kohen lineage, but has no rights of a kohen.
So he could marry a regular Jew, but he wouldn't be able to
perhaps
be involved with any of the kohen.
Right.
Yeah.
So even according to the opinion that says he is a kosher Jew, but still,
yeah, it makes
she
sense.
can't go back to eat.
It makes sense that he wouldn't be able. Yeah, because
Right. Now, we're going to have an interesting case again. Yesh min harishonim. There is amongst the Rishonim, the early commentators, Soiver, who maintains, Shebias goy ein shma bia. Relations, marital relations, physical relations with a non-Jew don't count. That's what some say. Doesn't count. It's not considered having relations. The kibias behema. Halachically, it's the same thing as having relations with an animal. Because the Torah made his seed ownerless. Shenemar, and we quoted this pasuk earlier as well, because there's a verse in the book of Yechezkel, chapter 23, verse 20. Asher besar chamoirim besaram, that their flesh, speaking about the non-Jews, is the flesh of donkeys. V'zirmas ksusim zirmasam. their flesh is the flesh of donkeys, and whose issue is the issue of horses. So we're comparing non-Jews, literally, as far as this is concerned, to animals. And that was the introduction that I gave, that you have to keep it in context. And therefore, based on that, v'lachein eishes ish, a woman who's married to a Jew. Her status is married. A Jewish woman who's married, shezinsa beratzon, that willingly committed adultery im hagoy, with a non-Jewish man. According to them, it's not a capital offense for her. She's not to be put to death for committing adultery. What do you mean? She willingly had relations with a man other than her husband. She's married to a Jewish man. She does not get the death penalty because those relations don't count. It would be as if she had relations with a male animal. And for that matter, same logic. A woman, a Jewish woman, is not obligated in giving up her life in order not to have relations with a non-Jewish man. We know that there are 3 sins that a Jew is obligated to give up his life and not transgress. And one of them is adultery. Well, this woman is married, and for her now to have relations with a man other than her husband, that would be adultery. So she would have to give up her life if it came to that. According to this opinion, not if that man's not Jewish. If the man who wants to rape her is a non-Jewish man, she need not give up her life because it's not adultery. Furthermore, another rule. This woman will not become forbidden for the aggressor after he becomes converted and becomes a Jew, as would be the case if it was a Jew. In other words, if a woman, a Jewish married woman, has relations with a Jewish man other than her husband, besides the fact that it's a capital offense and it's adultery, besides that, she's never allowed to marry or to have relations with that man. Even if she was raped and it's not her fault and we don't say that she was involved in an act of adultery, she was raped. Nonetheless, she's never going to be allowed to marry that man who raped her. So according to this opinion, that only applies if it's a Jew. If it's a non-Jew, and then later he converts and becomes Jewish, she'd be allowed to marry him. Because what he did as a non-Jew doesn't count because there's no relations over there. It's like an animal. The Yesh Meisifim, and then there are those that go further and they add, that she also does not become forbidden to continue living with her husband if he's not a kohen. See, normally, when a woman willingly commits adultery, a married Jewish woman commits adultery willingly, she becomes forbidden right now on 2 men. On the man she was with and on her husband. In this case, according to this opinion, they say no, she'd be allowed to stay with her husband as long as he's not a kohen. Most of the Rishonim, of the early commentators, disagree with the opinion that we just said. The Soivrim, and they hold that it's only as far as relationship or being a relative, Amru is that when the Chachamim stated Shatayre Ifkira Zaroi, that the Torah made ownerless the seed of the non-Jew, only as far as the lineage of saying that this person is the son of that person. Only there do we associate them and say they're like the animal kingdom. But not as far as the actual physical act of intercourse. She bias ish, bias behema. It's a human being. It's a man who she had relations with, not an animal. She didn't have relations with a donkey or a horse. That's not what we mean. And therefore she did have relations with a man. V'isha neseres lebayla, ulebayala b'viaskoi. And they hold that the woman does become forbidden for her husband forever, if she did it willingly, and for the man that had relations with her. If he's a guy, and later on he converts, and he becomes a Jew, she is forbidden to marry him forever. And this is what has been stated in the tractate of Soita, which deals with all of this, of a married woman being promiscuous and being with another man, that she's forbidden to be with either of them from then on. So it says clearly, Mekanin al yedei goy. There it discusses whether you can make what's called kinui, which means that her husband warns her basically not to go with so-and-so. And then she transgressed. We don't know what happened, but we do know that he warned her, and then the people saw her in seclusion with that guy. So we don't know for sure that she had sinned or not, but that's the whole case. Then he brings her to the temple, and she drinks the certain concoction and of the mixed water mixed with the whole thing. So what about if the man warns her, I don't want you to be with so-and-so, and that so-and-so is a non-Jew. So we say that is kinui. It does apply. Meaning that if she transgressed, and if there are witnesses that she was alone with so-and-so, who's a non-Jew, then the whole thing does apply, and she'd be forever forbidden to be with her husband and with that man. So we see that a guy's relations is considered relations, and therefore it does go into effect, and so forth. Ella, the only thing is, kinui, only when it comes to this particular law of kinui, of him warning her not to be in seclusion with so-and-so, some say, some argue, they say, no, there is no kinui for a guy. The husband can't warn her, don't be with so-and-so. And if he does warn her, then the whole story of Soita does not apply there. Even according to that opinion, it's only Parsha Soita Nemar, because in the section of Soita, in the Torah, it clearly states, speak to the Jewish people. That's how we are learning out from there that the whole story of the Isha Soita only applies if the husband is Jewish as well as the man that she's suspected of being with. But it's just because it says Daber B'nai Yisrael. But if not for that, still, her having relations with a non-Jewish man is adulterous. She's a married woman, and it is a capital offense, and everything goes along with that. V'yesh mefarshim, and there are those that explain, she'ein mekanim li'ishtei shel goy, that you cannot do kinui for the wife of a goy. Even according to the opinion that having relations with a non-Jew does forbid her on her husband. Kasvu Rishonim, the Rishonim wrote, but she doesn't get killed for it. Even though it will make her forbidden to be with her husband, if she willingly had relations with a non-Jewish man, but she doesn't get killed for it. Just as a Jewish man would not get killed for having relations with a non-Jewish woman. Shenemar, because the verse states, Asher yinafes eishes rei ehu, where it speaks about the prohibition of adultery. And it says that a man is not allowed to be with his friend's wife. So it says rei ehu, his fellow. Prat leishes acherim, that comes to exclude non-Jewish people's wives. So for a Jewish man, if he committed adultery with a married non-Jewish woman who's married to a non-Jewish man, so that would not be a capital offense for the Jewish man. The Yesh Mary Shayim Seifrim, and then there are those that hold She'eshes Yisrael Anivelis Lagoy, that a Jewish woman who's married, who has relations with a non-Jew, Chayeves Af Misas Bezdin, that she does get the death penalty through the Jewish court. 100%, as if it was a Jew. Yesh Mer Rishonim Seifrim. Then you have amongst the Rishonim those that hold that although, yes indeed, the relations of a non-Jew are considered to be relations, it's not an animal. Nonetheless, the woman does not become forbidden to later marry this man who she had relations with, the non-Jew. Later on, when he converts, so they say she's not forbidden to marry him. But for different reasons, not because he's an animal and it didn't count, and it wasn't really considered relations. No, for other reasons. Because there's no additional prohibition for her in having relations with this man. She was forbidden before, and he's not Jewish. So there was no additional prohibition. And therefore, you can't say what we normally say by the Soita case, that if she had relations with someone else, now she's not allowed to have relations with her husband, nor with this someone else. That's only said if that someone else is a Jew. Or another explanation as to why she would be allowed to be with a guy who she sinned with later on after he converts, is because not that when he was a guy, what he did didn't count. No, not at all. It's for a different reason. When a guy converts and becomes a Jew, so it's like a newborn child. He's a new person. So what happened before happened. He was a human being. He was a man who had relations with this woman. And that was a prohibition. Now, he converted, became a Jew. So it's a different person. So now she could marry him. And you can't say, well, she's not allowed to marry the boyel. This is not the boyel. Boyel means the one who had relations with her. Someone did have relations with her. That person doesn't exist anymore. He turned into a Jew. All right, that will bring us now up to the bottom of the right-hand column on page Reish Tzadik Tes, 299. This is the last part of this heading of Ishus. And this is Bitfisas Kiddushin, as far as Kiddushin, the marriage, going into effect or not. And I think we'll leave this for next time. So until next time, everyone be well and behave as a proper person should.